So here's something to think about. The problem of evil and suffering is not a problem for theism or Islam. It's really a problem for atheism.
There are few things more entertaining than when theists try to flip the script on atheists by either shifting the burden of proof or dodging the problematic entailments of their worldviews. In this particular case, Imran's claim here falls apart for a number of reasons. Firstly, the problem of evil, either the logical or evidentiary versions, is an internal critique of one particular God, namely the Christian version of the Abrahamic God that specifically possesses the omni attributes. Secondly, the problem of evil doesn't apply to Allah, the Islamic version of the Abrahamic God, because Allah isn't defined as being omnibenevolent, as it openly engages in behaviors that would contradict that attribute, such as deliberately creating evil and suffering and deliberately deceiving people when neither of those things are necessitated. Third, the problem of evil doesn't apply to atheism because atheism itself doesn't make or imply any particular moral statements. And lastly, unless the atheist is a moral realist, which of course has its own issues, the problem of evil doesn't apply to moral relativists because we understand that there is no mind-independent or objective standard of good and evil, only those actions and outcomes that we as people subjectively call good and evil as we perceive them in relationship to ourselves, our subjective goals, and the subjective goals of our societies.
And here's why. Prior to the 18th century Enlightenment movement, the Christian and Muslim world recognized that evil and suffering exist. However, they never saw them as problems per se. Instead, they just saw them as these difficult realities which were in some way intertwined with man's greater purpose, that of worshipping God or attaining paradise.
And the major issue here is that this particular response is nothing more than an ad hoc rationalization made to reconcile the cognitive dissonance experienced by holding the belief that a particular version of their God exists while simultaneously holding the contradictory belief that the logically unnecessary circumstances that allow for the logical possibility of evil outcomes exists.
However, during the 18th century, the philosophers introduced this new focus to humanity, that of progress, material progress, to want to attain paradise on earth.
This is an irrelevant smokescreen and has nothing to do with the original internal critique being presented. A critique, by the way, that doesn't even apply to the specific version of the Abrahamic God that Imran here believes to exist.
So now you guys can see how this difficult aspect of reality, evil and suffering, become a real problem. Not only a problem, but a barrier.
It's not a problem for us because we understand the subjective nature of good and evil, as that which is good and evil are subjectively determined by us humans, and would necessarily be subjective or mind-dependent if any version of this God were to actually exist. The question still remains to be answered by anyone who holds to this particular worldview. That question being that if this God exists, then why do the circumstances that allow for the logical possibility of evil outcomes exist when nothing necessitates their existence and their non-existence would not impact free will? And just to make sure it's clarified, an appeal to mystery will not get you out of this.
From an Islamic perspective, there are clear answers, in regards to the quote-unquote problem of evil and suffering as to why we suffer.
Well, yeah, because for lack of a better phrase, it's widely accepted in Islam that Allah is kind of a dick, which is precisely why this internal critique is reserved specifically for Christians who define their God in a very specific way.
But on atheism, there are no answers.
There actually is an answer. The distinctions between good and evil are entirely subjective to the individual, and these terms merely describe those actions and outcomes that we as a species empathetically project our subjective moral inclinations and intuitions upon. In the end, Imran's claim here holds no water and is just a vapid attempt to dodge a problem that doesn't even pertain to his particular version of his God. But for all the Christians out there who define their God in this very specific manner, this ancient question still stands to be answered. Will you reconcile the contradiction with a fallacious appeal to mystery? Or can you employ intellectual honesty and acknowledge the logical possibility that your beliefs are predicated on a bunch of myths that ancient people made up in a desperate attempt to reconcile the unforgiving indifference of the natural world all around them? Be safe, be excellent to each other. I'll see you next time.